effort that we as a family have made on the education front has to do with hope and with the belief that people first should have the opportunity for a good education. So many of these children that we work with, the places where they live do not have good alternatives. So it really is up to the charter school movement. So the whole goal of this was to use some of the structures that have successfully worked for water projects and affordable housing in order to pull down the cost for the individual schools. And it literally puts millions of dollars into each school each year. It allows those operators to focus on their real business, which is not financing schools, but to focus on building great students and great systems and great teachers. We have the opportunity, because of this first success, to draw many, many investors. Just in my life, I think this is one of the most exciting projects that I've ever had the good fortune to be involved in, with one of the best outcomes.
Good morning, everyone. You just met Alice Walton, a visionary philanthropist who for more than 3 decades has been leading the Walton Family Foundation's work to ensure that every child has access to a great school and the American dream. Today we're here to talk about one of the most transformative investments of her lifetime, the Equitable Facilities Fund. With $200 million from Jim and Alice Walton, the fund just closed a $112 million bond issue to help thousands of children get access to great schools and great school buildings. We're going to spend the next couple minutes talking about how it happened and where we go from here. I'm super excited to introduce my friend and colleague, Anand Kesavan, CEO of the Equitable Facilities Fund. Anand, tell us a little bit about what brought you to this incredible work.
Thanks, Romy. I get to tell the origin story. My favorite story. I get to tell 15 years of origin in about 5 minutes. Let me start by saying I'm humbled to be here. I'm humbled to be representing Alice and Jim Walton. I'm humbled to be granted $200 million to do so and represent the Walton Family Foundation, but most of all, to be here in front of the future of impact investing, the future of social impact, and part of my origin, which is net impact. So the career story is interesting. People often think of careers as a straight line, and I came from the investment banking world where it often is, or perhaps a ladder. Steve Jobs describes it as connecting the dots. The social impact world is a little different to me, and I have my own framework for my origin story and for a lot of social impact students. And I call it the heart and triangle framework. In essence, you have to know why you do the work, and that's the heart. You have to really know it, you have to be able to tell it, and you have to really believe it yourself. But that's not enough. We need to bolster it with what I call the triangle, and the triangle is a combination of 3 things, which I'll get into in the origin story, is 1, building the skills, the raw product skills. 2, it's bolstering those skills with sector expertise. And then 3, which is the base of the triangle and why we're all here today, is building the network to make it happen. And that's how eventually this all came together. So let me start with that heart. And what I said about the heart was you have to be really clear why you do it. I do this because. I do this because. Look in the mirror as if no one's in front of you, which isn't the case right now, and be able to say, I do this because. I do this because I believe every child, regardless of demographics, deserves to define their own destiny with equal and equitable access to capital markets. I practiced that a lot for like 10 years, all right? And one day...
It's good. Keep it in the act.
One day it came in handy when I least expected it. And that one day was when I got a phone call from a gentleman who said, I hear you have an idea. I've been working on this idea for 5 years, so, and before it ever got anywhere, and you'll hear more about that later. But when I finally met with this gentleman, he didn't ask about the idea. He asked me, why do I want to do this? And there was no hesitation there. And if I didn't have that down, if I didn't have I believe in this, I do this because I believe, I wouldn't even got a second meeting. And people ask me, well, where did that all come from? Where did this belief come from? And it all started here. I'm from the area. My mother, who's in the audience right here, was an 8th grade English teacher at Beaubien Junior High School right down the street. And it was early in my life, I was able to see the inequities and the inequalities in the classroom. And it didn't sit well with me even back then. Took me further in my career over internationally to India and Guatemala, where I helped start schools. And finally over to Austin, Texas, where we started 10 schools for predominantly low-income, predominantly immigrant children on the east side of Austin. And the way things worked just were not fair. The one commonality behind all of this in my journey was that the capital access was not equal. This is hundreds of years of capital markets being broken and not serving those who need it most. And I know why so many of you are here is to build that network, to build that capital for the ideas you're working on. And that's why we started the Equitable Facilities Fund. And that's where my heart came from. That's why I do this work. But that wouldn't have been enough, because that would have got me through the first meeting or maybe the introduction. But this is where the triangle comes in. And this triangle took me 15 years to build in my career. I spent over a decade as an investment banker. And the product that we have is very unique to what we do now, but it's not unique in other markets. It's exactly what I did for a living for over a decade, except those markets were efficient. Those markets weren't predominantly serving low-income students. And I simply brought that product expertise, which I built over a decade, into a sector that needed it. And that got me the credibility to do so.
So one of the things I know from listening to you and learning from you is you are very clear on the problem statement that the Equitable Facilities Fund is dedicated to solving. I want to take just a step back. Educational equity and the fight for education justice, there's a lot of different stakeholders. Just explain for us a little bit how public charter schools normally would try to access facilities and capital resources for facilities so that we understand how the Equitable Facilities Fund is making an impact for those schools.
Sure. So let's define that. This whole session is about solving problems. So let's define this problem. Let me give you a story. Suppose we had this half of the audience and this half of the audience. And this half of the audience, I say, hey, listen, let's go start a school in this neighborhood. Really difficult neighborhood. You guys are the experts. Let's go start it. Go to this half of the audience and say, same thing. You guys are the experts. Let's go to a neighborhood that really needs it, and let's start a school. But with one difference. This half of the audience gets a building, a $20 million, beautiful building to do it in. This half of the audience just gets a $100,000 grant, and you're on your own. How does that sound? Doesn't sound very fair, does it? It's not, and it's not. And it's not because the capital markets for this side are broken. Nobody wants to lend $20 million, especially into communities that have been historically underserved. And that's a market failure, a market problem that we are trying to solve. So what does this side of the audience do? I see Kyle Smitley back here in the audience, a CEO and founder of Detroit Prep. And she's been battling with this problem for several years now. We have a hodgepodge of solutions. We use patchwork. We spend a lot of time, but time and money that comes out of the classroom. And we use portables. We take short-term loans. We try to raise philanthropy from local funders. It's a hodgepodge of things that ends up taking money out of the classroom, time out of the classroom, and results in facilities that aren't as good, and that's just not fair.
Totally, no. I mean, that really resonates with me. I am on the board of a charter school in Brownsville, Brooklyn, in New York, which is a neighborhood in great need. Our school specializes in serving students who are homeless and students in transitional housing. And the time that the facilities search has taken away from our visionary school leader, it's just been hard to watch. So you had an idea for how to make this product attractive to investors, how to bring capital to these neighborhoods, and to create, high quality school buildings, which we should say are essential for kids to be able to learn. You can't learn if you're not comfortable, if you don't feel safe in your school. So how did you think about how to sort of package all of this together in a way that made it interesting for investors and attractive?
Yeah. Someone challenged me one day at a conference. I was always talking about the need for this, and someone challenged me and said, suppose somebody were to give you $1 billion, what would you do? And that's kind of tongue-in-cheek, right? Because I'm like, who's going to give us $1 billion? And I wrote an idea. I wrote a white paper. It was a conference just like this. I was sitting on a panel. Somebody came up to me afterwards, and I wrote a white paper that same night. And the idea was to borrow a tactic that's worked in the capital markets for clean water. In the 1980s, the EPA did a bunch of grants to states to clean up the rivers and drinking water. And I said, well, if somebody gave me $1 billion, I wouldn't necessarily go partition that to a bunch of schools. I would create a corpus that was scalable, that was multiplicative, that would build a credit, that could eventually do $5 billion or $10 billion in loans to basically create that entire capital market for schools. And the essence of this is everybody has to be a winner in that, right? In this case, the EPA was a winner, clean water was a winner, the states were winners. In our case, whoever funded it had to be a winner, whoever invested in it on top of that had to win, and the schools had to win. And eventually the students and the communities had to win. And that's how we designed it, by borrowing a successful tactic from another industry and placing it into the industry that we cared about.
So now that you've done this successful raise, $112 million, what is next for you? You're now running a fund, you have a team of people. What's next?
Doing more. This is a big market. We've done $160 million in loans to schools and raised $110 million from investors, along with $200 million in philanthropy. And that's just the beginning, all right? We've served 20,000 students. There's more than 50 million students in this country, almost 4 million of them in charter schools. So that's just a drop in the bucket. We've placed $160 million in loans. There's more than $30 billion in need. So we need to scale. That's the first thing. We're going to get bigger. Two, we're going to multiply the investment. We're going to find investors to match the money that we're getting from our equity, our capitalization grant funders. And three, we're going to sustain. We're going to build a model that sustains forever. This fund is going to be here 100 years from now because we're building it in a way that sustains forever to eventually help more than 1 million students.
Can you tell us a brief anecdote about a school that has benefited from the fund, just so we sort of have a sense of how this investment vehicle is having an on-the-ground impact?
Absolutely. I'll tell you a story about our very first loan, Soulsville Charter School in Memphis, Tennessee. This is a school in a very difficult neighborhood in Memphis, similar to Detroit in some ways, has been left behind by the capital markets and certainly by the school system. And we were able to give them a $10 million loan, which over time has saved them more than $4 million. And that $4 million goes directly back into the classroom. And I met with their principal last week in Memphis, and she described to me they've hired reading interventionists, they've hired paras, they've hired 2 additional sped teachers. And these are the people, the teachers on the ground, are the ones who are pushing forward the education in this country. And we need to get more of our money into the classroom to help the teachers, to help the students, and less to go towards paying the banks.
Amen to that. So, last question. A lot of aspiring social entrepreneurs in the room who have a vision for change and are passionate about a range of social justice issues. Hopefully some of you are super passionate about education. Come talk to us after. What is your advice? What is your advice? You had this unique experience of having Jim and Alice make a gift of what is really catalytic capital. They had a vision for change. They saw in you an entrepreneur with a big idea who could really change and reshape a market to better work for the neediest students. You've learned a lot from this experience, but just in closing, what advice do you have for folks in the audience?
I'd say three things. Three P's, actually. First, and you said big, bold solutions, push the envelope. When someone asked me what would I do, I didn't build a $1 million fund. I proposed a $1 billion fund. Most people laughed at me, I'll tell you the truth. I didn't get funded for 5 years. But you gotta think big. These are big challenges and they require bold solutions, and I proposed a bold one. So push the envelope and keep pushing it. And the second P actually goes hand in hand with that. It's a parallel track it. And it's easy for me to say that I pushed the envelope and scored big with a $1 billion fund, but I was hedging on the back end. I parallel tracked it, so I built my triangle stronger. Right? I didn't have all three parts of the triangle when I first wrote the idea, so I said, why isn't anybody funding me? So I took a third job at a big philanthropy, the largest charter school philanthropy in the country. And that's where I built the network, that strong base that helped propel my finance and my charter school experience, right, with the heart in the middle. If I didn't do that, and when I parallel tracked it, I negotiated what's called Google time with the fund I worked with. I got to spend 20% of my time on a pet project. And I already had the pet project, 1 day a week, which is where I spent all on this idea for more than 2 years, trying to, speaking at conferences, trying to raise money. I must have met with 150 people before I finally got the phone call from Mr. and Miss Walton.
Well, I just want to thank Anand for his incredible work. All of you, we need energy and ideas to close the achievement gap and increase equity for students. Thank you for talking today, and we look forward to talking with some of you later.